The Maxwell Institute? Sorry, I forgot which apostasy we're talking about.
Apostasy? I was wondering what my linguini was doing in the Pacific.
Noi crediamo in Dio et il Padre Eterno et in suo Figlio Gesù Cristo del Spirito Santo. Sorry, speaking apostasy there.
Noi crediamo che l'uomo sarà punito per i propri peccati e non per le trasgressioni di Adamo.
Pope Alexander VI was just like Jordan Belfort, except more hookers. It's true.
Nice.
I wonder what they yelled in Latin. Okay. Guys, real quick, do you think, because I'm of the belief that the Great Apostasy started like in the Bible times. Like
Absolutely.
During the life of the apostles is when it started. Some people think after, I think during it.
That is literally why Paul had to write the Pauline epistles. He was writing to people who were already going apostate, telling them about how they needed to turn things around so that they would stop losing the faith.
I
right?
will even add that we have this tendency to dumb down the apostasy to make it seem like everyone who was around when Jesus was alive was really nice. And we're like, they tried their best, but they only had a little bit, so they got really close, but they didn't. Like, apostasia, like, in the ancient Jewish context, meant like a rebellion. Not like, oops, we got this part wrong. Like, people were deliberately against what Jesus had to say. He was not a popular guy at the time.
Keep in mind, these are the same people that crucified Christ. Why is it so out there to think that these would also be people that would apostatize from the Church of Christ?
Yeah. And I think that we were just talking about the Bible, right, being lost. When was it that they actually have copies of the Bible, right? We actually are pulling from texts that are, 300 years after Christ?
Depends on the book, but there's some pretty big gaps.
So, I mean, we've got manuscripts, right?
That are at least 100 years after Christ.
We have no manuscripts from the actual biblical, like, people themselves. It's
Right.
It's all scribes of scribes of scribes.
People say the original Greek, and it's like, do you not understand the word original?
It's not the original. Yeah, it's
There's lots of words that I don't understand in gospel language. Original is not one of them. And so, the one thing, it's like, sorry, I didn't understand what esoteric was. It's like, yeah, I get that, but original, like...
Original Lay's or sour cream and onion. I know the difference.
Bad example, because the sour cream and onion is definitely better. But
So there's a lot of room for error, right? The people who killed Christ being still around, killing, like you said, every other apostle. None of them met a good end, right? Like, Christians were heavily persecuted. John got away. But I think that sets us up for a loss of the truth pretty quickly.
Right.
Like, during the time, even of the Bible's writing.
So let's describe what the Great Apostasy is for those who just want to know.
Yeah.
What makes it great?
Great Apostasy.
It was great.
Well, brothers and sisters.
Oh, no.
The Great
Can we not do this bit? Like, I just want one episode where we don't get the general conference bit. Like,
wait.
No. Okay, Quaker's
So
lost his
cringy.
opportunity.
Yeah,
Come
yeah,
over here.
no.
Come over
When
here.
I-
Come over
when I
here.
was a
September,
young
pan
man.
the camera
The
over to
great
Brad.
apostasy.
Okay, I'm curious. What were the cheesy metaphors that you guys used on your missions? Because we would use like a mirror that was broken and shattered into a bunch of different pieces, and like you can.
And when you pick up the pieces, you can put it back together, but it still has the crack.
That's the one that we used. What
So
did you
God
guys
brought
use?
a new mirror.
So we often use like the game of telephone,
Oh,
right?
okay, yeah,
so
that
like
one's a good
over
one.
time, like people telling one thing to the next, because the apostasy is basically the loss of truth and the authority to act in God's name. So anybody who doesn't know the term apostasy, that's what we're talking about: the loss of God's original truth and the authority to act in His name.
And
So-
this is nothing new either. Like, all through the Old Testament, there would be a bunch of yahoos screwing around doing weird stuff, and God would be like, that's it, no more of that. I'm sending the guy down. And a lot of the time it was a dude with a beard, and he'd show up and he'd be like, I talked to God, he says y'all need to quit. And then all of a sudden they'd be like, okay, yeah, that's cool. And then they'd be like, no, it's not cool. And then they'd kill the guy, and then they'd go back to doing their weird stuff, and God would just let them sit in their stupor of idiocy and let them kind of marinate in it until they are humble enough to be like, we should have listened to the bearded guy. Let's listen to the next bearded guy.
Yeah. And you have this long biblical history of apostasy, literally from Adam to Noah to even at the time of Christ. If there was not an apostasy at the time of Christ, people would have recognized him. So there was a loss of God's original truth, right? Yeah. And Christ came back, restored all of this. And like Kinsey was talking about, there's missionaries will often teach it by analogies, right? And one of the ones we used was like a game of telephone. Over time, as it's passed down from person to person to person to person, you kind of lose what the original truth was, right? It gets morphed.
When I was on my mission, this is a completely inappropriate analogy. The way I imagined it was like, you have got the well of living waters, and then they kind of boarded it up because they didn't like it anymore, and they just took like that little handful of water, and then they passed it to the next person. But it kind of like it loses some of the water as it goes down, so you need to fill it up somehow. So you just kind of look at it.
Oh gosh!
And then
Oh my gosh!
by the time you get to the creeds, it's like, this is nothing like I said. This isn't me at all.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. I like that
It
one.
was wrong. I never shared that with people.
Yeah.
But it made
Well,
sense.
when
in
I was
my
being
head.
taught by the missionaries, they just said it was the Dark Ages. They said it's like the Dark Ages, and I was like, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Because when you're Methodist, John Wesley, founder of the Methodist tradition, one of the coolest Christian reformers, he was noticeably different than the other guys because he wasn't like, hey, let's murder everyone. He was like, yeah, maybe they kind of messed up a little. Let's be a little more about love. And that's why, who's mad at Methodist? No one.
But there is that poem. Didn't he have a brother who was like, how did it say? How did it go? Dang it. Oh, how easily are bishops made by man or woman's whim. Wesley his hands on coke hath laid, but who laid hands on him? It's like, you can ordain as many ministers as you want, but who ordained you?
Uh-huh.
It's like, you gotta have a source.
So,
Yeah.
So that's essentially what this is. God's priesthood authority, the priesthood that Jesus passed to his apostles, that has been passed by all prophets since Adam, was taken off the earth because the apostles died. Those who were given the
The
priesthood,
apostles didn't die. They were killed.
they were
brutally.
savagely, brutally killed. Okay?
Most of them.
Murder,
Mm-hmm.
except for John, who's still walking around. So I know.
More on that later.
Yeah, but
Who did nothing wrong.
John did nothing wrong. But it's my belief that some people probably were ordained to the priesthood and went wicked, and their priesthood power was nothing afterward, like after the wickedness, right? And then other people didn't have it. Eventually, it gets so whack. And so you guys know how whack it was, we're going to share some stories from the Great Apostasy. Because I have found that when discussing the Great Apostasy, when you just say people were wicked, people go, nah, Catholic Church has been around forever, it's fine. And then you hear the stories, and then you go, it's like when your friend is dating a bad dude, and you're like, I've heard he's kind of weird, but he's probably a good guy. And then someone's like, he did what on Christmas Eve? Oh my gosh! Maybe you shouldn't be dating. It's like one of those, you know what I mean? Brad, what do you got?
So I actually should go last on this one because the Pope I want to talk about validates everything we're saying. Because what I want to say is just putting this all into context. There are people who sometimes say that the Book of Mormon can't be true and that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has to be false because of what they think about Joseph Smith or Brigham Young. This goes so far beyond that. What we're about to talk about is a loss, like a clear loss of authority, literally like attested to by people from its own church at several times, right? So we're going to get into basically the original Christian teachings, right? We go back, you have to draw back into Catholicism. You've got the reformers who came after, and we'll talk about that a little bit after. But for starters, let's go to Catholics. Let's go to the popes.
I've got an excellent example.
Take it away.
Evidence that there was, in fact, an apostasy. So here's the issue. Is the Great Apostasy, what's great about it, to answer your question from earlier, James, is it was just really big. Like, it wasn't just a few years before they said, like, okay, here's the new prophet. It was from the death of Christ's apostles, when there were no more holy vessels to transfer that priesthood authority, all the way to Joseph Smith. And an apostasy that size, you kind of have to have some really messed up stuff happen to say, like, yes, this was an apostasy. Like, you'd think, apostasy that big, lots of bad stuff. Let's get into it. So,
Just a little disclaimer, you will be offended by what is about to be said. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care if you're an atheist. What was about to be said will be incredibly offensive. You probably should just tune out right now. Just go to a different video. Mormon message. Just
all right, who let the Catholic in here?
I love the Catholics.
Catholics are good
I
people.
love Catholics as well. Here's the issue, is there's an argument that the Catholic Church was the vessel to transfer the authority to act in God's name and organize his church. And there was just no way that that authority could have been preserved in the Catholic Church. One of the better examples would be Pope Alexander VI. You hear Pope and you think, oh,
going there.
nice guy, cool robe, shakes everyone's hands, smiles a lot. Not always. Alexander VI was known for many things. One of them was what we call, historians call, the joust of whores. And
So you gotta explain what jousting.
okay.
Sounds like my trip in Vegas.
Oh gosh.
Okay. Oh.
New coming to the Bellagio.
Joseph Smith did nothing wrong. Kwaku might have. Pope Alexander VI definitely did. So what he did is, he was a fun guy. He decided, I'm going to have a lot of prostitutes. We'll use their formal sex worker names. We won't use whores. That's a slur. And he said, okay, I want 50 of you, and I want you to grovel on the floor for walnuts. This is kind of weird, right? It gets weirder. He then put up a challenge to his buddies where there were cool cash luxury prizes to those who could, we'll say, fornicate the most prostitutes. And I'm not exaggerating. This actually happened. And you cannot hedge the Catholic Church has been the holy vessel to transfer God's sacred power to organize his church on this earth without addressing the giant roadblock that was Pope Alexander VI and the joust of whores. The spirit went, see ya!
Also, the funniest part about what they did.
No, it's
I'm
not.
gonna go.
Okay.
I'm not gonna do the word. There's the parts we're leaving out. Can't say
You
them.
can look it up if you really want to,
I
but you
don't
don't
recommend
really
it.
want to.
It was so wicked what they did in the Vatican apartments. They shut the Vatican apartments down for, was it 300 years? Imagine something so wicked happening in a place that nobody can walk in here.
The village off campus at BYU, like all of a sudden, like they just kick all the Vasa bros out, and they're like, "No one can live here. We're done. Don't walk in here.
It
Don't
was
look
that
at this
bad.
building. We're done with it."
And it was that bad.
Yeah, just to be clear, it wasn't just his friends that were there. So he was there. I believe his son Cesare and his daughter were also there. The
Yeah.
people that he was throwing gold coins at weren't just buddies. They were the cardinals. They were the equivalent of, like apostles in our church.
Like 70s and apostles, yeah.
They were the people who elected the next pope. These
Having orgies on the floor with jewelry and walnuts with
say
with a bunch of expensive hookers.
courtesans is a nice name for them, but yes.
I think we can bleep it.
Courtesans.
I was hoping to get another picture of James White's face over someone.
Yeah, okay.
Who was it that came from the Catholic Church to like Salt Lake City or something and was like,
He was some cardinal.
and he said, "Do you know what you have here? It is either you or it is us. It's either the Mormons or the Catholics."
Yeah.
And so this podcast is why it's not the Catholics.
No, we will get into Protestants like the popes got into altar boys, but after that,
we cannot say that.
What?
We cannot say that.
Okay, we'll bleep it.
We have no room to talk. There are lots of stories about scoutmasters, and I just don't want to go there.
Hey, the church. Russell M. Nelson said the Boy Scouts are full of pedophiles. We're eating our church members out. All right, at least we have the gall to do it. But
Okay, Kwaku, take it away.
so,
Next apostasy.
We're starting with funny stories just because it's entertaining. But Pope Paul II, he liked melons a lot. He liked eating melons. And it's kind of cute. It's like he just really liked eating melons. He ate so many melons.
Melons is not a euphemism.
No. He's like actually
Sort
like fruit. And it's like
Sort clear.
It's really good in it.
thing.
You have
It's
some
cute.
prosciutto and cantaloupe. It's an amazing
Yeah.
meal.
He also, however, liked little boys. He liked them a lot. When he died, they said it was apoplexy or apoplexia.
What does that mean, Kwaku?
James, you and I both know how he died. The records are clear. Catholics and not Catholics. He was having sex with an altar boy. No, sorry, not a page boy. And the page boy was giving it to him in the garage so hard he died.
Oh man.
We'll have to bleep this out. But I can't even say it.
He died in the act of doing things with a page.
Yes.
Yep. Or having things done to him by a page, more accurately.
Yes.
But, and we don't say this just because we think, man, let's just take a dump on...
How
Thank you.
Oh my God!
I don't know if I can do this, guys. I have Catholic friends. My boss is Catholic.
Don't show them.
Don't show it.
They'll find it.
They will find this.
We're gonna bleep half of
I
that.
love
anyway, so it's
Catholics.
kind of
I love
mystery.
history.
Half
Of these stories came from me, but
Let me make it up a little bit. Okay?
Deeply
All right.
disturbed.
I'll take I'll take a second and see if I
I
can
don't
put a
want some
band-aid on this.
7-year-old like, oh, the mom is like, oh, he should watch
We
this.
said you'd be offended.
We have Kinsey's is way
Kosher?
way.
He just
kosher.
sold the papacy. Papacy.
I've heard it both ways.
I'm gonna put a band-aid on it right now. Just keep it rolling. You're chilling.
Go.
So
What was yours? Benedict the what?
Pope Benedict the Ninth sold the papacy and was then later described by
can you define papacy for people who aren't as smart as
the
like,
office of the Pope.
So
Or
he
the throne.
literally sold it?
He sold it and then was later described by Pope Benedict the 11th as essentially some Alma the Younger juju, like the vilest of sinners. So vile, so foul, so I don't know that word that I shudder to think of it. Exorable. So exorable that he shudders to think of it.
Such a bad word that we don't even know what it means. Like, that's pretty bad.
And just for the record, like if you're Catholic, you are not a bad person. And the popes, there were a lot of really good popes, like amazing humans.
If you molest little children, you are a bad person.
Yes, and
It's true.
that
Yeah.
part is absolutely true, and there is no wiggle room there. So that's my thing. Is this is the argument from the Catholics, and in our comments.
Sorry.
Does James have to leave?
Why? What just happened? What just happened?
I guess Kwaku and James can handle that.
You're saying there was no wiggle room? Really? That was the turn of phrase that came from There is no wiggle room.
Was there?
Are you tapping out, James?
Come on, James, come back.
I'll bring it back to normalcy. I'll bring it
I
back.
was
I have too many Catholic friends. They will watch this.
I'll bring it back with Julius II. Okay? It'll chill.
you got it, James.
We'll also talk about how
You're chilling. Hold on.
how they preserved so much like ancient writings. We'll give them props too. Okay.
Yes,
Ancient traditions. Like,
absolutely. So
Sorry.
All right.
Where were you?
I want to jump back in and say my apology to a Catholic real quick.
So guys, we're being so apologetic. Catholics bash us all the time
It's
on
true.
YouTube.
It's
We're fine.
okay. I won't be that apologetic, but okay. So look at me real quick. Kwaku pulled this move. I think I get to pull this move one time. So if you're Catholic, you're not a bad person, and there are lots of great popes and great Catholics in general. The only point that we're trying to make here is the Catholics and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints make the same argument that we have a unique authority, a unique mandate from God to run and organize his church on this earth. And there has to be some level of sanctity to preserve that authority. And the arguments the Catholics make is, like it's imperfect people, perfect gospel, and God is like aware of all the terrible things humans do, and he just lets things go anyway. And that's not a terrible argument. As long as you're not talking about things so heinous that they make the history books. You can't
so bad that you have to lock an apartment for 300
100 years.
It's not that they're bad, that all Catholics are bad, but there's no way that you can be the sole place where God's authority resides if that is who it was passed down from.
And the thing here is that it's not even just us saying this, right? Like, it's not like we're just sitting here like a bunch of Mormons saying, you know what? It's the Catholics who they don't have what they're saying they have. The Pope just after Alexander VI. That
I have two more examples.
you have two more. Okay, hit those and then I'll bring it back home.
I'm gonna hit on Pope Innocent VIII for a second here.
He would like that.
Oh.
Sorry, I had to say it. It was there.
that was amazing.
It
Don't
was
edit
there.
that out. I love that.
Pope Innocent actually he wouldn't when you see what he did to my people.
No.
But, Pope Innocent VIII. First weird thing isn't as bad. He was sick, and medical science wasn't pristine in his day. But they thought perhaps drinking the blood of people could help certain issues, and he
It's like a blood transfusion.
Yeah, a
They
blood
wanted
transfusion.
A blood transfusion. Just
But
that's
so they-
not how it works.
Not just people though.
Yeah, it was. So they took 3 10-year-old boys, cut them open, and he drank the blood from their bodies. But weird. That's not wicked, right?
Yes, that's wicked.
No, objectively. If anything in this world is evil, that is
Drinking the
profoundly-
blood of 10-year-olds. 3 of
yeah,
them. Like, you think after one, he'd be like, you know what? I don't think it's working.
Talk about drinking the adrenochrome.
And
he
we're
was-
getting fucked.
He was given a present, guys.
For good
Fucked on
reason.
He was
YouTube.
also
Censor this.
by Ferdinand given a present. He was given a present of 100 slaves from Africa. And you might be thinking, well, of course he just let them go. Like the rich guy at the bar is like, around on me. He gave them to all of his cardinals. Around the Negroes on me, guys. You get 1 and you get 5 and you get a couple.
Are you using Oprah's?
If you look under your
Yeah.
chair, slaves, you get a Negro and you get a Negro. Check under your seat.
Oh my god.
Some of them are kids. I know you'll like that. Like, it was just so bad. So you know what? When they come after us, Catholics, for priesthood ban, you know what? Not even in the same. One was kind of just generic American racism. The other was, hey, second most important people in the Catholic Church, do you want slaves? We haven't touched on the Native American genocides heavily waged by the Catholic Church. Why aren't there Native Americans? How come we lost 200 million Native Americans? Was it all because of sicknesses? Yeah, some of it. Was the purposeful sickness true? Yes, they did it on purpose. And who are the people that really spearheaded the genocide of the indigenous people? It wasn't Jehovah's Witnesses. It was the Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church and some of the Protestants. So I just think we need to remember that we're not just talking about some guys who used some magic rocks or had a couple more wives. We're talking about mass child rape and genocide. I can't think of like the 2 worst things in history. I can't think of anything worse.
And here's the deal. The Catholic Church itself recognizes that these behaviors are wrong and bad, right? Like, these are not things that Catholics are going out teaching, like, you ought to kill indigenous people and,
Very good point.
It's a little late though.
yeah. It's a little late.
200 million too late.
But here's the thing. When you look back at this, just after Alexander VI came, like, my favorite pope of all time, Julius II, the warrior pope. He was awesome. Not only did he expel the Borgias from Italy, but he also, he's the guy who closed the apartments forever, right? He said this on the day of his election. He said, "I will not live in the same rooms as the Borgias lived." He, Alexander VI, desecrated the Holy Church as none before. He usurped the papal power by the devil's aid, and I forbid, under the pain of excommunication, anyone to speak or think of Borgia again. Right? So here we have Pope Julius II literally saying that the office of the Pope had been usurped by the devil. I see this as very strong evidence for a falling away from the actual truth, for a falling away and loss of the true authority. And so that's how I look at this. When we're looking at all of this, there is, even from within the Catholic Church, a admission of loss of God's truth. There was at least one pope who was put there by Satan, right? So I think that this is actually something that's useful for us to know and think about when considering, okay, when was God's truth fully here on the earth? How much of it did we lose thanks to Alexander VI and people like him, right? Who people like Julius II recognized were bad. I think that's something that's important for us to consider in this discussion, because it's not all Catholics are bad. It's not.
Absolutely.
And let me also add, the Catholic Church being one of the pillars of Western culture, of preserving ancient writings and ancient literature from some of the best philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. The Catholic Church is not something to be like ignored. So if you're Catholic, I want you to be a good Catholic and help continue to build God's kingdom. You had your messy time, but you know what? It's a lot better. So I actually admire a lot of what Catholicism is bringing to the world and the fight against wickedness. But the reality is, we butt heads sometimes. Catholics have their videos about why we're not true, and we have our videos about why they're not true. I think our reasons are a lot better. I really think like look, call me crazy, but I think your church stops being true the minute like mass child rape begins. I feel like
Catholics on YouTube are the guy at the bar that's kind of like pushing you a little bit, and you pull like a huge glass and just break it over their head, and then come at them with it.
Look, I'm just saying. I bet they ordered a lot of pizza to the Vatican, but
oh boy,
too soon. Too soon. I'll bleep it out.
Oh man.
So
Well, here's the good news: is we believe that basically every religion has some fragment of the gospel, and you can go a long ways with that. We think we're going to see a lot of Catholic dudes in heaven.
I think that Catholics, they did their part in preserving the truth, right?
Exactly.
They without Catholics preserving the Bible,
without your guy, without your favorite pope,
without Julius, my boy, Julius
Pope.
II, the warrior pope. If we didn't have people like him, we would not have the scriptures that we even have.
Yeah, how often do we talk about the Apocrypha on this show?
Yeah,
I like it a lot.
And like the Reformation would not have had room to happen. So there were many people who were we have church leaders who have said there were people in other religions who were led by God to teach the truth and build towards the restoration of the truth, because we believe that everyone throughout all time has had opportunities to learn parts of God's truth, right? And so with that parts of truth that we have, building on it, we're still restoring the truth, right? The restoration is still in progress. So we are building towards actually the second coming of Christ. And I think that's something that is important for us to remember when we're looking at these historical moments, because there were good people back there.
And if I may, let's get into doctrine just a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I believe, like, yes, the mass rape and genocide are again the worst things I can think of. A bad FICO score, like I can't think of anything, But one of the most horrible things was making God the Father no longer a father. And if I can take a second here, I think that taking the clear nature of God the Father, who is literally our Father, right, a human being who's walking around the Garden of Eden, who is seen next to Christ, who is actually a person on a throne, we're made in his image, literally his image. When you remove all that away and you say in your creeds that God is omnipresent, immaterial, invisible, and without body, parts, or passions, you have removed God. You have created a worship of nothingness. It's literally just an idea. It's no longer there. And when you've reduced God to nothing but an idea, you're going to get institutions that have the mass torture of children. You're going to get institutions that say murder all the pagans by any means necessary. You're going to get institutions that do such heinous and evil things, because who are they praying to? Who is their worship going to? When you remove God being your literal father, you don't believe everyone's made in his image. And that's literally how they had the justification of the murder of the pagans in the East and the West. They're not really people. They're savages. They're less than human.
There were debates in the Catholic Church for a long time as to whether Africans were humans and had souls and all of that sort of thing. It's like, this should be, pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.
All created in his image, but they would ask, are Africans humans? And that was in part what led to the slave trade.
Well, that's just as bad as not having the priesthood during Brigham Young's. Now,
no,
I said it.
Yeah.
And here's the thing that I think with this is that we have people who were doing their best with what they had, and the fact of the matter is there was an apostasy, just like the people who wrote the Bible said there would be. You have in the Bible itself people talking about how there will be a falling away that comes before Christ comes again. And so we have evidence of this happening. Even from right after the killing of the apostles themselves is kind of a testament to that, right? So moving forward, you have this falling away, this loss of truth, and people started recognizing that, and that is what led us into the Reformation. You had people who, like Martin Luther, recognized there were these things wrong, nailed his 99 Theses on the door, saying, like, these are things that the church is doing that are improper, that are not what the Bible teaches us to do. And you have these reformers starting to try to reform. But I like this analogy. It's that if the priesthood of God is like a tree, and that tree has been cut down, saying that the Catholic Church that had the authority had lost it. If it has died and lost the authority, is that just going to pop back up just because we changed a few things about it? Or does it take the power of God to resurrect that truth?
And that is what Roger Williams, a very important Christian leader, said. He was also one of the founders of the Baptist colony in Rhode Island, fun fact, that he was waiting for God to literally restore truth. You needed a reformation before you needed a restoration. And there were many Protestants looking forward to the restoration. But since we hewed the Catholics like Samuel did Agag, let's talk about Protestantism for a little bit, okay? Because that's going to be another big group of people watching this, right?
Yeah.
I know Greek Orthodox are going to watch, but are they ever really included in the debate? You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, you know.
If you're
I
Greek
like 'em.
Orthodox, you're like 75% of the way there.
Who's mad at them?
Just join up.
Who is mad at the Greek
I mean,
Orthodox?
just join up. You know, like we've
They
got
don't-
all the things you like. We've got deification.
I like the Greek Orthodox.
We've got like a continuous line of uninterrupted priesthood. Come on in,
They kind of
guys.
just mind their business.
The clergy can marry.
There's like, yeah, we're gonna sit here
Yeah.
and just kind of, you know,
Yeah.
and they're cool.
No celibacy is a big one.
That's why they don't have the same problem with them.
But yeah. So explain to me.
Yeah.
So so far we've only made the same arguments essentially that the Protestants make, which is everything was wrong, it got too far away, and here comes Martin Luther to the rescue, who says everything's wrong, let's change it back. Why
Right.
is that not sufficient?
So it's important to note that Martin Luther,
Stand-up guy, right?
yeah, well, I have my beef with him.
For the
Wait,
most
same
part.
guy as the Jews and their lies.
Yes, he wrote that book.
Same guy.
Yes, that's okay.
Okay.
Let's clarify. That's the book Martin Luther wrote, not Kinsey's opinion. I just wanna
You like my save there? I was like, yeah, that's the book he wrote.
yeah. So Martin Luther, not to be confused with Martin Luther King Jr., who is so not Martin Luther, but Martin Luther was not really the first guy to say the Catholic Church is corrupt, but he was the most notable and really started pushing the idea forward with the 95 Theses that he nailed to the door of a Catholic building, and creating this energy of people to say, I should be able to go directly to God for forgiveness. I should not have to I don't need to pay my way into heaven. I think the Catholic Church is acting as an improper middleman, and what they've done throughout history is bad. And this guy lit a spark, and people started to go, actually, I kind of identify with that. Yeah, yeah. But it just went a little bit too far. And he ended up doing what the Catholic Church also did. He kept the doctrine of the Trinity, and kept preaching that God is, again, immaterial, triune, omnipresent, without body, parts, or passions, not literally your father, but only a father poetically, that you're just a creature, you're not actually a child of God until you're born in the covenant or born again in Christ, you become a child, therefore all the pagans and everyone who's not just like us is wicked and they're not fully human, right? You got into the nastiness. He wrote a book called The Jews and Their Lies, and as Martin Luther, kind of being one of the founders of Germany in a sense, his book, The Jews and Their Lies, which has some of the most horrific quotes you'll ever read, which sounds just like Nazi propaganda, was later used by the Third Reich, by Nazi leaders. So we're talking about someone who advocated the murder of God's chosen people, who continued to preach that God was Trinity and not a father, and sort of ended up opening the door for other people like John Calvin, who I call Mayonnaise Mussolini. I think he was a really bad dude. He was a terrorist. He lit his enemies on fire. Very bad guy, right? So it ended up creating a lot more of a violent culture, and
I think part of it comes from what you see happening with the popes, like kind of Julius II using the church for political power. And so you had a lot of that happening in Europe. But as people started getting to this idea of like, hey, I can talk directly to God. And as they started translating the Bible, and you have people like William Tyndale getting the Bible into English for people, and people
William Tyndale's my spirit animal, man.
he's the bomb.
Yeah.
And so you have these people who actually prepared the way for there to be an actual restoration of the church. Because I like to think about it like this. Like, what would have happened if Joseph Smith had had his vision mid-Dark Ages?
would have been like Joan of Arc. He would have been killed.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
this is an excellent question. It's like, 1823 or 1820. That's when Joseph Smith reports that he experienced the first vision. That's a long time after the apostles died. Why does God wait that long? I submit that there was no other time in human history where you could have done it. I mean, King Henry VIII, was it? That came. Yeah,
Yes.
he said, you know what, Catholic Church, I like what Martin Luther's doing, and I'm out too. And he had some ulterior motives, but he did the
Divorce
same
is
thing.
okay now.
It was not a popular move. There was a lot of people died, and then you finally get America, and you have enshrined in the political document that you have the freedom to worship as you choose. And it almost didn't work. Anyone who's even a little bit familiar with our history knows it's not like, oh, the Mormons are doing some weird stuff, but that's just America for you. It's, wow, the Mormons are doing some weird stuff. Let's kill them with pitchforks and burn them. It's like, that happened in the first place, where it was like, you can do whatever you want and believe
That was
whatever
the
you want.
best case scenario.
There was literally an extermination order written against Mormons in Missouri. And so, like,
It
if
lasted until the
recently,
70s?
yeah. And so I think that you see the Reformation had to happen in order to form an environment in which the restoration could take place.
Exactly.
And so, like, I think God restored his church as much as he could, as soon as he could. And I think it's very interesting that there were a lot of reformer sects that ended up, like, literally joining the church because they were looking for someone who would restore the authority of God.
Right.
That's where a lot of the early Mormon converts came from. A lot of the early members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints were people who were looking for a restoration, for actual prophets and apostles, right? Yeah. The same organization that existed in the church when Christ was there.
So let me ask a question. A lot of people have asked me this. Why would God wait that long? Because here's what I normally hear. Why would God wait that long? Because we've had the Bible for 2,000 years. Actually, a lot of Christian leaders do not communicate this with their congregations. The Bible, we have no original manuscripts for the Bible. Like, we literally have none. We have copies of copies, sometimes copies of copies of copies of copies, sometimes stories that may not have actually happened, like the woman caught in adultery, that were later added in. And then from there, you've got a ton of different languages that did not have access to those manuscripts. So you have hundreds of years that go by of a small set of people that actually have the manuscript copies of what they hope are copies of the original. And then it's not until the printing press that this can actually be made somewhat available worldwide. But in most languages, no, it's not there. So it's then a while after the printing press that the Bible can really be given around the world for people to read. And it's not until a while after that it's put into all languages. Some languages we maybe still don't even have. And then it has to be the right Bible. So it has to be the right one, right? And it's got to have the right translation. It's literally not until the restoration of the gospel around 1830 when the Bible is as wide and circulated as it is today. And it literally took the ushering of Joseph Smith for you to have the Bible you have.
Pre and post parenthetical period.
You're getting
deep. Big words. Explain them, Kinsey.
Oh gosh,
different episode.
Different episode.
Okay, we'll get into it later.
I do want to hear from Kinsey though, because this is I think the important evidence that the restoration was necessary and the Reformation was not enough is just the doctrines that have been changed. And like one of those doctrines, kind of along the lines of what you were saying, Kwaku, is that God created everything. We call it ex nihilo. It's another dumb word. It means out of nothing. There was nothing, and God made everything. Matter didn't exist until God said it exists. Versus kind of, I mean, this is a view that came around like well after Christ and his apostles were dead. This was not something that was taught originally in the New Testament. Versus like kind of a more, I mean, LDS, Latter-day Saint line of thinking, which is kind of like there are laws that govern the universe that coexist with God, that matter was there and God is the great organizer. And this is very important for something that I suck at explaining, but Kinsey is really good, which is the problem of evil. Can you explain why this is so important?
The theory of pure creationism can't get around the problem of evil.
Can you define the problem of evil, actually?
The problem of evil is that how is an omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, am I missing any?
I think those
God, how does he allow omnipotent? How does he allow or evil to be in the world? Or how could he have created evil? If he created the world ex nihilo, meaning out of nothing, if that means he created evil. Well, the way that the LDS Church gets around that is we don't believe in pure creationism. We believe that he organized the world and that there are laws, that eternal laws that govern God, and he created and organized the earth out of matter that already existed, including evil as a thing that already existed.
So
I'm
you're
not sure if
saying
that's-
then evil and good predate our God becoming a God.
right?
And that's a good thing, because if he was just the beginning of all things without being able to really define all things, then he saw everything that would ever come to pass that's good and evil, and then he would by default be the father of evil. One way Protestants do try to get around it is saying he's the ultimate cause of all first things, but not secondary causes, and the secondary causes where evil happens, but that's just nonsense. Like if you're
Right,
charge
if
of
you're
all,
omnipotent or omniscient, then you know the secondary causes that are going to come. It's like, I didn't hit her with a bat. All I did was hit the bat into the tree, which just happened to bounce back and hit her in the face. Like,
And we talked about this a little bit on the Mormon Gods episode. But if you are an architect who builds a bridge and say if it's not the first act, then if it's not the first car that crosses the bridge, then it's the second car that crosses the bridge, causes it to fall and kills the family inside of it. Still your fault. So if God creates a spirit that, doesn't sin at first, but then sins later, it's God's fault because he created that spirit. Unless he didn't create that spirit, unless intelligence has existed co-eternally with God.
Yeah,
There you go.
and I think that this is a really interesting thing to look at and think about, because interestingly enough, there are a lot of people who do not believe that that's the way things are, even though that's what their church teaches. I actually taught people
Absolutely.
on my mission who thought, no, God isn't responsible for those sorts of things, and didn't view creation the way that their church taught. And what's interesting here...
but their church won't teach it. They
Yeah.
won't talk about those things because they know people will intuitively say, no, that ain't right.
And part of the reason why is because we believe the Bible to be the Word of God as far as it's translated correctly. And you have this disagreement between all of these different Christian groups who say, like, no, we have it right. No, we have it right. And you end up with this doctrine of, yeah, God's responsible for everything evil. And no.
Imagine being opposed to such a reasonable stance on the Bible. We believe it's true as far as it's translated correctly because there are many translations. How dare you not just believe them all? Like, no.
And I love how there's like...
Are you saying God's Word is insufficient?
I love when people say that the Bible is completely infallible. It's like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John aren't even infallible per their own recordings of what happened. And I
But
understand.
there's scribes recordings of their scribes recordings of what
Yeah.
happened.
Right,
yeah.
but agreed. Yeah, what they originally said was probably the exact same. But like, I mean, and people will say, well, it's important to understand they were written to different audiences with different contexts, and I agree. I think that's important, but ultimately, Jesus couldn't have said 3 different things right before he died, and that's what he does in the 4 Gospels. So it's like right there in the 4 Gospels, you have discrepancies. Like, if you can't get that right, like, I'm sorry, but Paul, talking to how much he loves the people of Philippi, like, that's just not going to make the cut. Like, that's not.
So there is great truth and wisdom in the Bible, and that's why it's in the scriptural canon. We believe the gospel of Jesus Christ, that he was born of a virgin, that he atoned for the sins of the world, that he brought forth the truth, said, I'm the way, the truth, and the light, that he died, was crucified, and that he was resurrected. We believe he is the Son of God, and he's God on earth. We don't believe the extra baggage that was added by creeds and people without the priesthood that do nothing but confuse people. That's why I always say there's a difference between the pulpit and the pew.
Yeah.
When we went to LA, we were talking to people about who were not LDS. We literally went on the street. We're talking to people like, hey, what do you believe about God? And there's these people saying like, I believe when you die, you got to become the next thing. You become just like the divine. And I was like, so like you're gonna be like God? He was like, oh yeah, for sure. And then he ended up saying like we're all gonna go back to where we came from. So I asked, do you believe that we all existed in heaven before? He goes, oh yeah, without doubt. People just naturally know these things.
Yep.
And it's not until you've got these academics and these priesthoods that come and say, actually, God is not literally your father. He's omnipresent, immaterial, omniscient, and without body parts or passions, and invisible. And you will not see the face of God in the next life because he does not have a literal face, but he is in all places.
And one
What?
thing that I want to say about it that's kind of uncomfortable, they won't let it go because it's tied to their power. They have power in the world because of what they teach, and then they're unwilling to look at any other alternative, just like the Pharisees with Christ. And I think that that's a very dangerous position to be in when people are presented with the possible truth but cannot get past their own pride, honestly, and their own ability, their own gain that they have from the world because of where they're at. And so I actually think I'm really, really grateful that I was actually born in the church and not like didn't have to convert from anything where I would lose something, because I think that's so much harder to do. But I think that you have people in positions of power who automatically write off the doctrines of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because it would undermine their livelihood.
Can I pose one more question before
Yeah.
we wrap? I think that this is maybe the most important lapse in the gospel from the Protestant Reformed view. And I think that it's the question of what happens to people who don't hear about the gospel, people who were born in a time when the gospel wasn't prevalent around the world, people who were born in areas of the world where it's not teachable now, die before they're really old enough to comprehend what that is.
Well, you shouldn't have been an Indian in 1220. It's your dang fault. You know what? Like, no.
And this is, I mean, from the pulpit and the pew thing, your very argument. If you ask anyone, they'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to be with my family when I die and go to heaven." And they're going to say like, "Oh yeah, like people who are good will go to heaven. God will make a way." And they believe that, and we believe that. The problem is their pastor doesn't believe it.
Right. Most Christians in America believe that if you don't know Jesus when you die, there's a chance if you're a good person. I've talked to so many Christians who just naturally believe this, because you kind of have to be mentally unstable to not believe it. To think that God made most people to suffer is somewhat sociopathic, right? So
that God would literally have to be sociopathic.
Exactly.
And literally, this is the reason why I personally, if I weren't Mormon, I think I would probably be atheist, because I could not believe in a God who would condemn so many people to death and hell afterward, eternal punishment, just because they didn't hear about Jesus in this life. And so I think that this is actually a hugely important thing.
And the way they respond to that is, well, if you couldn't believe in it, then it's just your pride. It's like it's if you don't believe in something immoral and adopt something evil, then you're the one who's at fault. If you read the things that people in ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the way they can convince people to do terrible things, it's using this logic. People will say, I think, like, yeah, I know the troops being here, like the American troops, I know they might be a threat, but I feel like kidnapping women and doing filmed beheadings, this is wrong. This is the way God wants it, and if you don't submit, it's because you're wicked. And they use this brainwashing method. You do that for a couple hundred years, it's not going to be hard to convince people, hey, let's wipe out a couple thousand Indians in this country. It's not going to be hard to get people to do that. So, look, the Doctrine and Covenants has one of the most harsh verses where it says the same spirit that urged on the Missouri mobs to kill the Latter-day Saints is the same spirit that hath riveted the creeds of the Christian fathers. It was not often the spirit of God. It was the spirit of the adversary. And it's tough doctrine to get into because we still think those Protestants are still going to heaven. We're not saying they're hellbound, but we are actually saying that influence that wants to create violence and darkness has never come from God.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is the second thing that gets us around the problem of evil. There's two things. There's the fact that we don't believe in pure creationism, and then the spirit world, the fact that we believe that everybody gets a second chance. You know, and we read about that in 1 Peter 4:6. For this cause was the gospel preached also to them that are dead, that they might be judged according to men in the flesh and not according to men in the spirit. Anyway, but the
No,
principle.
that was a good scripture.
I know
Say it all the way.
Oh gosh.
No, you're good. Just keep going.
They'll look it up.
Anyway, so the fact that we have this like time period where 100% the gospel will be preached to everyone, everybody gets a fair shot. That's what makes God a merciful God and what upholds it. But something also that I think is the greatest asset of the church is our kind of right to question, or even encouragement to question things, which doesn't exist, at least from from the Catholic people or just people of other religions that I've spoken to on my mission, is that they don't feel they associate questioning with doubt, and that with sin. And so the fact that we encourage people to question things and to take things to God and ask if it's true is one of the greatest assets. And it's surprising to me that people don't agree with that when we've got, knock and it shall be opened unto you, or we've got James first, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God. Yeah. I mean, it's littered. The Bible is littered with encouragements to ask, and that I think is one of the greatest assets.
I want to tie what you said right there back to Catholics just very briefly. I know that we already talked about the Catholics a lot, but I think this is actually a really good evidence that the Catholics were onto something and just not quite there. The spirit world kind of answers the question of where Jesus was like after he died and then, of course, came back and appeared to Mary Magdalene. He was dead for 3 days. And he said, "Don't touch me. I haven't ascended to my Father yet." Well, where were you? And that was the answer. Is he was in the spirit world preaching to those that are dead. I don't know why you'd preach to someone who can't be saved. But, I mean, and so we understand that he was in the spirit world talking to people who basically are pending the resurrection, the second coming. And this makes sense because the Catholics talk about purgatory. The problem is purgatory is really sad and the spirit world's really happy. And so they were close. There is a place in between now and resurrection, but it's not just another hell. It's an opportunity for, as Joseph Smith said when he recorded his dealings with God, he said it was a chance for those who would have received the gospel if they had had the opportunity to receive it before the resurrection.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's this that enables God to be perfectly just and perfectly merciful. Mm-hmm. Outside of this, you end up with a God that's either too just and it's an eye for an eye, right?
There's no grace.
There's no grace at all, or a God that's too merciful, and then there's no justice. And
he's
if
a liar
either,
if he's not
exactly, if
just.
those two things cease, God ceases to be God. And so that is something where we need to have a balance within justice and mercy. And as far as I know, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the only church that has doctrinal theology that teaches of a God that could be perfectly just and perfectly merciful all throughout time, from the beginning to the end of eternity.
Yeah. Dang. Well, I mean, we've said our bit. We will let the comment sections do the rest, and it will be a bloody battlefield.
Oh, gosh.
It's going to be, woo, get the blog spots
You guys
coming.
don't do a good enough job of explaining the arguments. No, you don't do a good enough job of explaining your arguments. Your arguments are awful. Get out of our comments.
Oh gosh.
No, look, whenever I talk about the Great Apostasy online, there's always some guy who's at the library all day long pushes up his glasses and goes, "Let me write my 7-page blog spot in response to this." I'm not gonna read it. I got too much to do. I'm sorry. I know that no Christian apologetics. It's so well, are you gonna respond to P. Johnson Weatherford, some nobody in Missouri who wrote on a WordPress? I literally don't care. I make a video, I'll watch it, but I'm not gonna read your 7-page
And
blogs.
that's the attitude of way too many people these days, which is why we're doing this, so that you can watch something,
listen.
get a little bit of hopefully something uplifting out of this,
And
right?
I'm not gonna watch it unless if you have a lamplight, like a yellow lamplight on your webcam, and I turn it on and I'm like, is he filming in a cave? I'm not watching that creepy video. Go get a studio light.
Anyway, enjoy this.
Do not like this video. Do not subscribe. Do not share it with friends. Do not join the LDS Church. Not! Haha. Someone doesn't know it's opposite day. Haven't been reading their constitution.